Hey everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to another Chai with Coaches. I'm here with my co-host, Naheed Overfeld. Naheed, how's it going?
Doing well. Glad to be back in the United States. I've been traveling for a while, so nice to be back on this live stream.
Yeah, welcome back. So as you may or may not know, this week is International Women's Week. I think yesterday was International Women's Day, but we're people celebrating all week. And some folks are talking about the pay gap and how it's still an issue, and people are debating whether it is an issue or not. Um, it is unfortunately still a thing, the gender pay gap. And here we have actually a resource that's pretty interesting. It's funny, not funny, as I like to say, because it does highlight the pay gap and the way it is. For once, Twitter is good for something. So this is called the Gender Pay Gap Bot, and what it does is it essentially calls out a lot of hypocrisy in the world. So companies are using the tags like about International Women's Day 2022, and this pay gap bot will highlight that company and retweet and say what the pay gap is, the median hourly pay gap for that company on an hourly basis. Now, the first one, when you say 8% is not that bad, sure, okay, fine. 14%, how's that? Is that worth talking about? Stand
And
by.
compounded over your career, Drew. That's something that people don't get. It's not 8% for the year.
Right, right. And again, this 14% is getting worse. 0.9 is pretty good. This one is 41.7% lower, right? And this one, I love this one because it says, as a part of the IWD 2022, our diversity committee led an initiative to recreate images of iconic women. So this is a great example, a really, really great example of how, frankly, money is wasted in organizations behind stupid, meaningless efforts, right? That are just, frankly, just for show. They did this to showcase the women that they value so much at their organization. Meanwhile, when it comes to actually putting their money where their mouth is, literally, they're not doing that, right? I mean, you're at 41% lower pay for on average or median wise for women than men. That's inexcusable. It's ridiculous. You know what I mean? And this is not an isolated situation. You have situations where you're going down here. Okay, so this one's 12.5 higher. That's great. 10.8% higher. I don't agree that it being higher either, but I think it should actually be equal. That's just my belief. But 32% lower. Again, this one here, right? This one's pretty good. 0.6% lower in the grand scheme of things. That's not horrible. 5% lower. 10% higher. 17% lower. 32% lower. I mean, it keeps going on, and this is actually 25% higher. 22% lower. You can see how on an average basis, you're having a lot of organizations that are paying a lot less to women than they are to men. Now, there are a lot of factors that go into this. I don't want to, make it seem like these organizations are evil by default, right? I think part of this is also that, and it's a cultural thing, right? Women are not taught to speak up and to really negotiate for themselves and advocate for themselves, right? Culturally, it's across a lot of cultures. There's a lot of cultures that don't encourage women to speak up at all. Many East Asian and South Asian cultures encourage that, as Naheed, you're familiar with. What's been your experience in the world? I've been talking for a while, so for 3 minutes, sorry. But what's been your experience, Naheed, in the professional world?
Not very good. So first and foremost, my first job, so I was an undergrad biopsychology major. My expectation was I was going to do my PhD. So my first job was working in a lab at University of Maryland. I had no job, I just graduated from college, working in retail prior to that. So I had no real experience as to what an annual salary ought to look like. And my first salary that I got was something like $17,000. Okay, $17,000. And nobody, you can't even live off of 17,000. And even as a college student or a recent college grad, I couldn't live off of it. So I
Yeah.
was at home, and nobody sat down with me and talked to me about what to consider. Like, what are the issues to consider when somebody presents you with a salary? So, first thing, I got it, I accepted it. Second time around, I got accepted. I worked for the NASDAQ stock market at that time. Again, and here's what I was trying to say earlier. I started off at a low salary. And what's the first thing every company asks you?
Yeah.
What salary did you make, right?
Right.
And they will, not all, but they will contact the HR of your previous company and get certain facts. The HR is allowed to provide certain facts, right?
Right.
And so you cannot really fudge on what your last salary was. And then automatically that's where the bar sets every time you move up. Now I got lucky, truly just lucky, in that when I was working for the NASD at that time, it's now called FINRA, they decided to do a survey and they used the private industry. So this is stock brokers, and it's the stock market really. So they looked at private brokerages and say, okay, look, let's see how far of a discrepancy they are as a regulatory agency. And in that process, they bumped everybody's salaries up to a particular level. So I at least got onto an even playing field with the other members, whether they were male or female,
Hmm.
in when we started that. But then here's the thing: even if you get to a even playing field, if you're not taught how to continually negotiate and advocate for yourself, what
Yeah.
happens? Some people are always going to keep going further and further ahead.
Yeah.
And that's the real challenge when you have a pay gap. It's not in the moment. What you are really giving up on is, what are the pay increases? What are the bonuses? What's the interest that you would have made if you had that money in your bank, or you invested it? It it could be, I don't know, I'm throwing this out there, but $500,000 over the career of your life when you add up all of that.
I'd say more than that.
Yeah,
I mean, $500,000 is probably over the course of like 5 or 10 years. You know what I mean? Like you're talking about probably a couple $1,000,000 over the course of your career, especially considering inflation and everything like that. I mean,
right.
you know,
And what you do with your money. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, to that point, I remember when I got my first job. Like obviously I'm not a woman, but I do come from the South Asian culture where it's like, oh, just take it, whatever
Yeah.
you get, it's great, it's an offer, take it. So
Mhm.
even as a dude, I can only imagine what would have happened if it was a female. Like it's even worse, right? But like to your point, you get that first job, and that impacts every job after that you get, right? Because they're always asking, what are you making right now? Now HR nowadays laws have changed where they can't share certain things, like you said, they can't share your actual salary or whatever, but they can share certain things, and you can lie about your salary, sure, but if you're in the same company, and you're planning on moving up in the same company, they can see there's visibility into that,
Mhm.
and so I got my first salary. I just said that they offered me $40,000 a year, which again, even in this area at that time, it's not a living wage. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I was living with my parents back at that point because I just got out of school and I was trying to figure things out. So thankfully, I had that going for me because otherwise, I would not have been able to afford anything myself. And I tried to negotiate. They would not negotiate with me because it was just like, oh yeah, $40,000. Well, that's what it is. And my boss, when I got the job, my boss was like, I thought I hinted to you what you could ask for 50. I'm like, I asked for 50, and they said no. And he's like, well, they're supposed to say yes. I told them to accept 50 if you asked for it, and I'm like, well, they didn't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's just like there's so many things that factor into this. But as much as I was negotiating, I tried to negotiate a little bit. You know what I mean? My parents were like, "Oh, just take the job. Just take the job. A job's a job. It's a salary. It's great." You know what I mean? And it's that mentality, right? That mentality of just take what you're offered, and that like I said, I can only imagine that times a thousand for a woman. Where it's like, "Oh, I'm just gonna take what I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to cause any waves. I don't want to be seen as a bitch or as a
Mhm.
uncooperative, emotional person." Because again, that comes into play. I've heard so many women that I coach talk about this, right? Where they're talking about how they felt pressured to take the first offer that they
Right.
got, or even the second offer, right? And that they didn't want to be uncooperative, or they didn't want to be seen as not a team player. They didn't want to be seen as emotional because they might, even if they weren't actually upset, they might be interpreted as being upset
Right.
or rocked by the situation, and that's just not. It's just not fair, right? I mean, the frustration that women feel around this is absolutely warranted, right?
Mhm.
But then they're still vilified for it. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And it's something where it's just it's frustrating for anyone who knows who observes it happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say a big part. So I'm going to step out of the workplace paradigm for a moment, and I'm going to just talk about some of the situations I face as a coach.
Hmm.
And one of the things is, as I mentioned many times, I work with my own coach. So we talk a lot about pricing and what happens when somebody comes in at level X and then things change and now we're moving to level Y, which means the price of the program has increased. How comfortable am I as a person to have that conversation with people? And so it becomes so fundamental to who women generally are. We tend to always devalue our sense of worth, which sounds so cliched, but what I'm trying to get at is if I don't feel like I am putting forth enough effort, right? Because it's always time versus money. If I'm not putting in for this effort and time, then there's a part of us that don't feel like we deserve this. And that's part of this process. I mean, men's mentality is not going to change overnight, but women's mentality related to this, which is equally important, even more powerful, I would actually argue, is for us to start standing up and saying, you know what? We deserve it. We deserve this to have this conversation because as much as it's a fear and they think that a person's going to say that they're going to respond in a particular way, it's our own mindset that has that fear that they're going to respond in that way. And guess what? If they respond in that way, it's easier said now. Wasn't so easy when I didn't have a job. You recognize that that culture is not right for you.
Yeah.
And I've worked in places where I've realized much later, because when people say culture, I'm like, I need a job. I need money. Culture is the last thing I'm concerned about until you're in the culture.
Right.
And you're like, crap, I need to get out. And I feel stuck.
Right. And then no amount of money is gonna make up for that culture being crap. Right. I mean,
And it will never change. You can try to twist yourself into a pretzel trying to accommodate their needs, and it will never change.
Yeah. I mean, on the business owner side of things, I started a coaching mastermind, which I think I told you about this a few months ago in January, and we've had some awesome wins. And of the coaches, there are 4 women and 1 guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was super happy because earlier this week, last week, one of the female coaches, she came in and she was saying, she's like, I did it. I made the offer I didn't hesitate, and I made the offer to a client for 40% more than she would have otherwise asked for on an hourly rate. And the client didn't blink and just accepted it. And she's like, that felt so empowering. And I was like, that's amazing. Congratulations. And I didn't know what she offered before. I was like, how much did you ask for and how much do you normally ask for? And she said she asked for $500 an hour. And she was like blown away that the client accepted it. Because she was like, she would talk herself out of that. She'd be like, oh, this person can't afford it. Am I really delivering $500 an hour versus value? Is it something where I'm okay with this? Like, is that going to be, how are they going to see me if I make this offer or I ask for this much? And she let that all go and just asked for it, and she got it, which is huge, but that's something that again, it's not, she wouldn't otherwise have done that if we hadn't had the discussions we had in that mastermind group and then talked about it and said, let's give it a shot. What do you have to lose? And framed it that way. Cause you don't get that frame normally, right? You're not brought up with that frame. I mean, some people are. Don't get me wrong. Some people are absolutely brought up with that frame. Their parents taught them certain things. My parents and most people's parents that I speak to did not bring them up with that frame.
Because they don't know it themselves.
Right, exactly, and especially on the business owner side of things, especially on the entrepreneurship side of things. My parents to this day, up to this morning, still tell me that they want me to get a full-time job because they think it's more secure and safe, and it doesn't depend on me getting clients and whatnot. That's just their frame, right? That's where they come from. That's their idea of what's safe. They have no idea about the world that we live in, right? The same thing is true otherwise, right? Like back in the 40s and 50s, and 60s, it was a situation where you just take the first job, the first offer you're offered, right? But again, the culture was very different back then. Employers cared a lot more, or at least appeared to care a lot more about their employees back then, because you were an employee for life, essentially. You didn't bounce from company to company back then, right? There wasn't this idea of taking advantage of workers, because it just was a situation where it was a codependency thing, right? And the companies relied on the employees relied on the companies. They had pensions back then, which are
exactly. They have safety plans that we don't have anymore.
Companies don't give a shit about employees anymore, and it's starting to come back around. Where they kind of have to, but that's feeding to the whole Great Resignation thing, right? And why that's a thing is because companies just haven't given a shit about their kind of employees for so long. Because now it's coming back to bite them in the ass, and now they're freaking out because what do? We've disrespected our employees for so long. that now they're starting to feel it and starting to recognize it, right? So it's something where if you don't get that frame of if women aren't given that opportunity and empowered to have those conversations, men too, but to a lesser extent in most situations, right? Women again culturally are in a lot of cultures are taught to try to be submissive or be more cooperative and whatnot, and I think that there are situations where they've kind of overcorrected a little bit sometimes, but I think this the getting to a place of happy medium of a homeostasis where it's like you can actually we're not there yet, we're getting there, right? As you can see from that Twitter account, there are some companies where they're getting to the point where they're paying women more than men, which I don't agree with either. I think it's a situation where it needs to be just even, right? It's the same work, same qualifications. Neither one should make more than the other, period. It's just if you really want to get to true equality, it's not. I mean, you're not gonna fix 50 years, fix 60,000 years of unfairness and discrimination by overcompensating now, right? But it's a situation where you do what you can and try to make things even, right?
Yeah, it's always hard for me to see how women, because we don't know the reasons behind why they say that there are some companies where women earn more. If it's a predominantly female company, then your CEO is female, the senior managers are female and stuff like that. But I wanted to say a couple of things about what you said. First and foremost, I'm so glad to hear that there are all these women in your mastermind group. We are finally coming to the place where we realize that coaching, investing, self-investing, whatever form that looks like, is important for us. Because most of my coaches that I meet and talk to, they're like, I hardly see women. It's always the men who are like, yep, I'm going to spend the money, I'm going to do it, and this is how it's going to be. I've decided it's worth it. So I'm very glad to hear that women are stepping up on that plate because they're taking themselves seriously. They're taking ownership of what they want to accomplish, right? And everybody needs somebody to, like you say, give them an expanded frame of work, because we come with this kind of frame, and life makes us grow. But if you can have someone to help you grow a little bit faster and get to your place, your goals a little bit easier, why the hell not, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very glad to hear that. Another thing that I was thinking, when you think about when I was in school, let's put it that way, and it's been a while. At that time, there was a transition between who used to be the people who used to be psychologists and therapists, which were mostly male, and they were transitioning to a lot more women, significantly more women. And because of that, what they were finding is as they were having fewer men in the field, as a whole, the wages of that field began to go down. So it was not just that you were having more women coming in and therefore there might have been more equality. The whole field started getting paid less as a group, because they said that it was sort of an exodus of men who were the top earners. And so now they were paying less and less. Now I don't know how true that is today, but that was something that they always said of traditionally male dominated fields. If there was a real push in where women were coming in, the salary, the wages were not where it used to be.
That's just, I didn't hear about that. That's interesting, because I know therapists and folks they make a crap ton of money in general. So I mean, I guess depending on what the original like wage was back then with more men in there. I know for the coaching field, it's predominantly dominated by women, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's like 75% women at this point, right? It
And
does have
our
some issues
Indian
with
coaches
diversity,
don't do well at all.
huh?
As a whole, very few coaches are forget successful, where they feel like they're earning enough to really do more than just tread water.
Right. Right. I mean, and I know that there are a lot of males and that
Mm-hmm.
have the same struggles as well. I think
Mm-hmm.
coaching has a different issue, which is more about the diversity as a whole overall, right? In terms of racial diversity and ethnic diversity. But no, I mean, I the challenges of changing the field, changing the way that people think about the field. I think the first step is first again getting people to admit that there is an issue, right? That's the first thing, because I mean, there's so much nonsense out there and actual fake news out there that talks about, that just pushes a different agenda, pushes an agenda of propaganda. And then you have the other folks who, again, overcompensate to the point where they're just, it's, they, even the people who would otherwise be allies are turned off by that approach. And that's the case in this situation. That's the case in the racial diversity situation and discrimination in that world. It's unfortunate, but you have people who would otherwise be allies that get turned off and like, oh well, you know what, screw this. I'm not going to bother, because this is something where that person or that group of people over there, they associate those extreme values and those extreme views with the whole movement, and that's not really what it is, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
it's a common issue, especially nowadays, because everything's so polarized. Everything is so extreme. It's like you got to be on the extremes of everything unless if you want to get anything done. But it's not the case at all. The real work is done closer to the middle.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So why don't we give some tips as to if you're a woman and you're looking to somehow, if you're paying attention to this subject, which I mean we all should be paying attention to, even if you're a manager, by the way, what biases are you coming with when you look at somebody? Because it's no longer the excuse of education is blown out of the water. More women have a higher degree of education than men do, for example. We're not working less. That was a huge thing, right? Oh, women have kids, so they're home a little bit more, or they take more time. Not true anymore. So the question then I would start with saying is really start with from your own personal perspective. Who inside of me is uncomfortable with asking for something more? Right. So, and I was having a conversation with a client of mine not that long ago. She said, I felt really uncomfortable. She was feeling really uncomfortable with asking for money, for more money for the same work. And that's exactly what it is. It's that time versus money mentality. The value doesn't come in at all. It's just like, here's my time, here's my blood, sweat, and tears. And for that, I believe I should be compensated some arbitrary, pull a number out of your ass kind of number anyway, right?
Yeah.
And so that to me is really the first place for people to start talking or thinking, because it is very unlikely that you're going to sit in front of a manager and go, oh, you know what? You're asking for way too much little money. Let me help you out and let me push you up the ladder, right? It's just not going to happen that way, or it's unlikely to happen, I should say. But more importantly, you feel a degree of empowerment when you start taking these things on for yourself, as opposed to having somebody guided is a different story. I always like people to guide and mentor and all coach and all the rest of that. But when you start taking that on for yourself, it's like, yeah, I can handle this. Like, I deserve this. I deserve to have a seat at this table. I'm not out in the corner waiting for them to call me in and give me my slip to say, okay, this is how much we're willing to pay you, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think the other part of it too is on the employer or organizational side, right? I mean, that you have a responsibility to all your employees to treat them fairly, to treat them with respect. And respect doesn't just mean you respect them as like in the conversation, or you respect them overall as a whole, and you respect the work that they're doing and the effort that they're putting in. And that comes in a couple ways. One, I think as an organization, whether it's man or woman in charge, respect everybody and understand that you have to pay them a fair wage.
Right.
Profit, you're going to make profits regardless. Let's be honest. Like, you're not going to any amount of money you pay them, you're going to make profits on it, because otherwise you wouldn't offer the money. So if you save a couple bucks, congratulations, right? But you're just at the same time, you're just respecting your employees by doing that, by saving a couple bucks at their cost,
at their expense, right?
right. But the other side of things is, if you're a woman that's moving up the ladder, send the elevator back down. You know what I mean? There are a lot more. I mean, in the last year, you've had so many more women CEOs and women executives that have taken seats in places. Still a lot of room to grow, and
a lot of room to grow.
A crap ton of room. I mean, honestly, right? But it's not a situation where you made it and that's it, right? When you look at it as an I thing as opposed to a we thing, that's where the problem continues, and allow the problem to continue to grow, frankly, right? So when you go and make success and break through that glass ceiling, make successful strides, send the elevator back down, right? Don't feel like you're like, oh, I have to prove myself here now that I've made it this far. You've already proved yourself. You're already there, right? So now it's your opportunity to help someone below you, someone who otherwise wouldn't be able to help themselves, and know that they can make the strides for themselves, right? Mentor, volunteer if you want to, but Take the time to mentor people at work, right? Make reasonable offers to people when you have the opportunity to do that. Don't feel like you have to prove yourself and like make up for the salary that you've made, by taking it away from somebody else.
Yeah, I would love it if more companies that, maybe not the very tiny ones if resources are tight, but more companies would actually start doing a real analysis on wage gaps, whether it's gender, whether it's race, it doesn't matter, seniority, because I feel like a lot of these things are also endemic. Most of my career, I've had female bosses, and I don't think that they would deliberately try to squash a woman and say, okay, I'm going to pay her less. But if they're following systematic rules, which is
Mhm.
okay, so if I'm making this up, but if the rule is if somebody's making X and they're coming in on a vertical position, we will pay them 10 times X or 20 times X. And all you're doing, whether they realize it or not, is perpetuating that systemic kind of bias against women, whether it's women or race related, it's all pretty much the same thing. If
Mhm.
people can just stop and kind of look at that and not do things rote, but with some degree of awareness, I think that would help a lot because I can say most of my managers, I don't think they ever had a bad intent. Now they may be ignorant or unwilling to look at various things, but they didn't do it deliberately to push people down, kind of thing. And I think that's the situation we may be in, at least with some people. Just do it with awareness so that you can see, oh yeah, okay, here's where this bias is continuing. And
Yeah.
you're never systemically, you're never giving a person the opportunity to then finally step up to their true worth.
But I think that's part of the issue, right? It's that they're not doing anything intentionally, not doing anything intentionally,
Right.
right? They're not taking the time to be deliberate about it. They're just on
Exactly.
autopilot. When you're on autopilot in a system that's broken, the system's going to still be broken at the end of the day, right? So if you think about it, where the phrase autopilot comes from is from planes, right? If you're on autopilot and the level's off, you're going to crash. So you can't just be on autopilot. And you have to be actually deliberate. And, okay, well, this thing's messed up. We got to make sure this thing let's
Right.
let's right the ship
Mhm.
intentionally, right? I think that's part of the struggle is that people aren't being intentional about it on either side, right? In any situation. But the other part of it too is I'm also not advocating that just by virtue of being a woman or a person of color that they deserve automatically this the same across the board. Experience and value that they bring to the table also matters, right? Like there is that subjective piece of it where it's like this person is more skilled than another person,
Mhm.
right? I
Yes,
would not I would not
absolutely.
say,
I don't think anybody is arguing for across the board. If you're the
well,
same person, you get this amount.
here's where I bring that up is and because I think that's one of the extremist arguments
Yeah.
which turns people off. Like for example, I forgot a couple years ago which movie it was, but it was Jennifer Lawrence and I think it was Bradley Cooper. It was Silver Linings Playbook, right? And they were like, oh, Bradley Cooper got a lot more money than Jennifer Lawrence did,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, right. And blew up because it became public.
Right, but Bradley Cooper at the time was a bigger star than Jennifer Lawrence was. It wasn't because and I don't know if it was because she was a female or not, right? But billing wise, he was a bigger star than Jennifer Lawrence was. There was another situation where I forgot what
If
other
you
one.
look at, and they've done this on a regular basis, I'm going to push back on a little bit, and I don't
Mhm.
remember names, numbers, or anything like that. But
Sure.
if you look at the top female actors and what they get paid, it's
Mhm.
significantly less than the
Oh,
top male
I
actors
agree with you, but
across.
I mean, I was saying that's a bad example. I'm thinking like I was saying that's a bad example to highlight the wage gap. I think in general, yes, absolutely, there's definitely a huge wage gap, but I think that was the wrong example to pick, right? Something like I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example right now. Like I mean, if looking back on like Alien, like Sigourney Weaver, right? The only real big, the massive, not only big star, but the biggest star in that movie was Sigourney Weaver, right? She killed it. Now, if she had made, I don't know how, I don't actually look into that movie, so I don't know how much she made, but if she had made less than anyone else in that movie, billing wise, that would be a huge story to highlight and be like, what the hell, right? If there's a clear female lead situation like Scarlett Johansson, right? If she was in her own movie, she made less money than anyone else in that movie. It would have been ridiculous for that to be the
Right.
case.
It
You
would
know,
have been ridiculous, but I again go back to what is she making as a female lead versus what are other male leaders, other
right?
male leads making. So she
Right.
may be making top in that movie, but that doesn't necessarily mean there always is a significant gap.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that 100%.
And what was issue with, I think it was with Jennifer Lawrence's situation, was that it was the same agent that worked with both of them,
Mhm.
and this agent who was representing Jennifer, right? It's not Jennifer sitting down in front of the table and saying, "Hey, this
Right.
is give me this." So there was a lot that was kind of going on behind the scenes about how did, and in what it sounded like from my
Mhm.
very scant memory of this, the agent wasn't again trying to be malicious, but exactly what you were saying. She was on autopilot. I believe it was a woman actually. She was on autopilot and perpetuating something that she's been a victim of over and
Yeah.
over again as well.
Yeah, because she was on, like you said, she was on autopilot. And I guess my point is more just like you want to look at all the different things to factor into that
Yes.
situation, right? If it's like a situation like George Clooney and a new or female star, obviously George Clooney is going to make more money, right? Because he's George Clooney, or Johnny Depp, for God's sake. You know what I mean? Like that's just it's a different
I think
situation.
you're picking some old actors. You gotta pick a little bit more recent ones. Those guys, their movies are tanking. At least George Clooney's movies are not doing well. But I
Yeah,
get
that's fair.
your
That's fair.
point.
That's fair. I mean, yeah, all them like Ocean's 11, that kind of thing. But no, it's a big example. But that's just my point. It's just like we have to pick our examples and not be extreme about everything. Where it's like no matter what, it always has to be equal. It does factor in the skill level factors in, and which also allows for the other side of things to be true too. If a woman's more skilled than a man in this situation, she should absolutely get paid more than than the guy does, right? It goes both ways, and I think it's you have to factor in things objectively, and where it's not just saying, okay, well, just by virtue of being a woman and a man, there needs to be a difference there. That's not, but that's what the way the system is built right now. Unfortunately, whether intentionally or unintentionally, it's just skewed that way, and we need to work extra hard to do that. And I think it starts. It's not relying on either on the employers or the employees. It's relying on both. Both have to change in order for it to be a change in the culture.
I couldn't agree with you more.
So, what do you guys think? As you're watching this, please feel free to comment below. If anything we've said has triggered any thoughts for you, any situations that you want to share where you've been, or you or someone you know has been a victim of pay gap discrimination on either side of things. But if you guys like this video, please hit the like button, hit subscribe. This is our second to last chat with coaches. Our next one will be our last one, as Naheed and I will be going after some different endeavors. But I'll obviously welcome back sometime. We'll have to do a reunion at some point to this. But yeah, tell us what you think about the video today. What are your thoughts, Naheed? Anything you want to leave folks with before we hang up here?
Yeah, I mean, just what you said. If you're a hiring manager, you're in HR, you're in one of those positions that where you have an ability, where there's some leeway where you can actually stop and think about, should I go left versus right? We would love to hear your perspective. Did we get it completely wrong, first and foremost? But secondly, we would love to leave you with this idea that maybe there's an opportunity for you to pay attention to what are you propagating, what system are you continuing with, and make an informed or an aware decision.
Yeah. And then if you're on the other side of things, if you are someone applying for a job, negotiate, right? And if you're not good at negotiating, which a lot of folks are not, men and women, but seek out some help. Talk to a coach, talk to a trainer. Folks, there's a lot of help out there available to you that was not available 20 years ago. You know what I mean? Seek that help. It'll be worth it in the long term. If you spend a couple $1,000s getting that support and being able to change your mindset, that is worth a couple $100,000 or even $1 million, as we talked about
Yeah,
long term.
absolutely. I'm going to put a plug for Drew over here. So if you are in a position, especially as you're moving up that ladder, I mean, let me tell you, it starts from the beginning, but especially as you're moving up that ladder and you're feeling anxious and you got a position that you really want to apply for, reach out to Drew, because it's really about how to give yourself confidence. He'll help you with both the confidence piece, but there are also going to be pieces like, do your homework. What's out there? What are people asking for? And he'll lead you through that so that by the time you're sitting in front of the person, you have embodied that message. It's not blah, 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 right? Like, okay, let me stumble over my words to say what I think I should be saying.
Thanks, Naheed. I appreciate that. But it really is a mindset shift. So I mean, it's really any mindset coach, not including Naheed as well, right? It's shifting that mindset for yourself where it's you're changing your beliefs, and because your beliefs are probably not serving you and they're probably not right, frankly, right? I mean, if you believe
We're
that,
serving the other person, by the way.
right, exactly, right, and they're serving that other person, or they're serving someone else, or maybe a younger version of you, right? Ultimately, they're not helping you to grow the way you need to grow to be successful and be happy. So take some time to examine that. And like I said, we'll be here. Thanks so much for watching. We appreciate the time. Take care, stay safe, have a great week, and I'll see you guys at Meaningful Monday. Take care.
Bye.